Hi, everyone. Welcome to Us in Flux Conversations from the Center for Science and the Imagination at Arizona State University. My name is Joey Eschrich, and I'm the editor and program manager for the center, where we use the tools of speculative fiction to get people thinking about our future in ways that are inclusive, imaginative, and inspiring. And Us in Flux is one of our responses to these strange and trying times. Every other week, we publish a short story that explores themes of community, collaboration, and collective imagination in response to transformative events. And then we host a public conversation to go even deeper on those topics. Our latest story was published just last Thursday. It's titled Cyber-Cuscuta Manifesto, and it's by Regina, Kanyu, Wang. Regina, thank you so much for being with us here today.
Hi, thank you.
Just to introduce Regina briefly, Regina is a science fiction author from Shanghai, and she writes in both Chinese and English. And she's won the SF Comet International Short Story Competition and multiple Xingyun Awards for global Chinese speculative fiction. And her stories can be found in a bunch of publications, including Harvest, Shanghai Literature, Hong Kong Literature, Flower City, Science Fiction World, Galaxy's Edge, and Clark's World magazine, among others, and in anthologies published here in the US, in the UK, and Canada, as well as in China. We're also joined today by Athena Aktipis, an assistant professor in the Department of Psychology at Arizona State University. And Athena, thank you so much for joining us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me here. It's really exciting to be a part of this.
So to give you Athena's, or some of her bona fides, she studies cooperation across systems from human sharing to cancer. She's the chair of the Zombie Apocalypse Medicine Meeting, a co-founder of the Human Generosity Project, and she hosts a podcast titled Zombified. She's also the author of a book, The Cheating Cell, How Evolution Helps Us Understand and Treat Cancer, which was published earlier this year by Princeton University Press. So during our conversation, you can submit questions for Athena and Regina, and I highly recommend that you do, because we probably won't get to everything we want to talk about, so you can help us do that. So you can just use the Q&A button at the very bottom of your Zoom window, and we will shift to questions about 30 to 35 minutes in, and questions, comments, any thoughts, we really welcome those. And without any further ado, let's jump right in. So Regina, could you just help us start out by telling us a little bit about the story and what inspired it, where the idea may have started for you?
Yeah, sure. So the story is basically about a digital being called Cyber-Cuscuta, and it's an online public hearing. So human beings are listening to the Cyber-Cuscuta talking about themselves and talking about their relationship with human beings. They told us how they emerged from the internet and how they digest the data, and also how they turn data into information and ingested the entropy that was produced during the process. And they proposed a way of co-living with human beings, and together they can make it to the stars. So that's basically the plot. And actually, the name Cyber-Cuscuta, it's from a plant that is common in China called cuscuta. I don't know whether you can see it in North America, but it's kind of a parasitic plant that crawled and intertwined other plants and live on the nutrition they get from other plants. And I read a paper that they still, they also kind of steal the genes from other plants. So they get the DNA from the other plants and turn it into part of themselves. So I started to build this Cyber-Cuscuta being based on this idea. And later on, when I pitched this idea to CSI, Joy and Bob recommended Athena's work to me about microbiomes. So I also drew inspiration from microbiomes into this story. That is kind of, we will talk more about later.
Yes, we definitely will. But before we actually talk about microbiota, Athena, I wanted to kind of ask about the way the story deals with cultural information. These Cyber-Cuscuta are agents that curate digital information and take on a life of their own sort of through that information. So I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about that in relation to your research and how the story relates to theories about cultural transmission and the science of cultural transmission.
Yeah, so I see a really interesting connection between Regina's story and the idea of memes. And I don't just mean memes in terms of the sort of images with text that teens share with each other on the web. I mean memes in their more sort of formal definition that Richard Dawkins put forth in The Selfish Gene. And the idea of memes as sort of units of information that can be passed from brain to brain. And what's interesting is that when Richard Dawkins first put forward this idea, it was before the age of the internet. And so the idea of memes then was really just these, you know, things that people would share with each other, usually like words or ideas, and that would be passed around in brains. But now with the immense interconnectedness that we all have through the internet and you know, all the other networks of communication that sort of tie in with it, the internet is an essential piece now of this sort of transport network for ideas. And so memes now, you know, yes, like there's a sort of colloquial use of the word memes, but memes in terms of these units of cultural transmission, they are accelerated like crazy by the interconnectedness that we all have through electronic media. And so for me, there's this very interesting connection just about this idea of memes, but then it also kind of, you know, Regina's story brings up these questions about, well, you know, what happens when these memes kind of take on a life of their own in a way, and, you know, kind of bringing up some of those ethical questions that arise by kind of personifying the memes in a way. So to me, that was one of the really interesting connection points of Regina's story with sort of what's going on now in the cultural transmission space with the way that we're all now so embedded in electronic media.
Regina, does that, I mean, does that play into how you were thinking about the story? It does occur to me that, you know, this story comes out in a moment when it seems like the kind of interface between the digital world and the physical world is kind of like harder to distinguish than it has been before. And we're seeing a lot of ways that internet culture and sort of digital communication like really affects real world events. I don't know, was that part of the kind of creative stew for this piece?
Yeah, in the ending especially, and also in the process, because the Cyber-Cuscuta, they of course take the data from human beings, but also they generate data by their own, and on the reverse, they influence human beings' life. For example, they create more like hatred information that leads people to like produce more like violent things or like bad things or negative things. And also like in the end, the Cyber-Cuscuta proposed to human beings that like not only to stay inside the digital world, but also to enter their brain, because the electronical signals and neural signals, they have like similar format, and they can actually like cross the boundary from the digital world into the real world. And that's kind of an implication that our virtual world is actually influencing our natural world, and actually it can like move further on and kind of reach like a more intimate relationship with us.
Yeah, can I jump in?
Please do, yeah.
Yeah, I think this also brings up this issue that the ideas, the memes, these units of cultural transmission that get passed around and that proliferate, you know, really our brains are the environments that they sort of live in and proliferate in. Now also, you know, electronic media as well, but there is this sort of very intimate relationship that just exists between these units of information and our own brains. And it always has been the case that, that the ideas that spread best are the ones that best take hold in our brains and are most effective at getting us to put them forth to other brains. And so, like, one of the things in Regina's story about, you know, these Cyber-Cuscuta sort of sometimes feeding off of negative emotions, and that, you know, they can use those to basically grow and expand and proliferate. This is not so different from the notion that if you have information out there that makes people feel angry or upset or fearful, you know, even if it's not true, people can still get very activated by that and motivated to share it, which makes that information itself grow. You know, if people are then sharing it with other brains, putting it out on other platforms. So this intimate relationship between our brains and what we pay attention to, what we amplify, what takes hold in our neural tissues, and then what ideas end up expanding really in the idea population. You know, this is an evolutionary dynamic that has been, you know, at work ever since humans were able to share information with each other, but it has accelerated at this, you know, insane pace now with electronic media. And so I see Regina's story as kind of a way of kind of commenting on some of those aspects and making them really kind of come to life as their own forms of life, almost as a way of representing just how intense now that that flow is of information, and the possibility of kind of expanding different types of information based on how they're interacting with humans. Even if, you know, it's not to our benefit, they still can use us to you know, sort of meet their evolutionary goals. I'm putting in quotes because obviously it's not intentional, but even information will expand in the population if it is good at surviving and reproducing. It's just sort of basic evolutionary dynamics.
Yeah, it sort of strikes me that the story helps emphasize that, like, the digital spaces that we inhabit and the cultural spaces we inhabit are kind of ecosystems, and individual human users, for example, of the internet are shaping the internet by the things that they click on and the things they contribute to these platforms. But then there's companies, which are sort of superorganisms composed of all kinds of humans and technologies working in concert or sort of in concert with each other, that are trying to accomplish their goals. And so they're shaping the internet. But then the information itself is kind of in a way competing to get to the top and to kind of attract attention and continue to be reshared and recirculated. And once information sort of shaped and put out there that way, it's competing with other information. So there is this kind of ecosystem model that has made me, I don't know, think differently about how I'm using the internet and the kind of ethical stakes of it. You know, something we've been reminded of in a bunch of different ways over the last few years, but I think the story puts it in a helpful set of biological and evolutionary frameworks. So Regina, that's been like, you know, very, very useful and interesting to think through as we've spent time with the story.
Thank you. Yeah. So when I was writing the story, like also I have to say that like, because of this project, I was able to get inspirations and information from both Joy and Bob, and also Athena. That helps a lot because at the beginning, when I developed the story, like the idea of what is Cyber-Cuscuta and how they work is not that clear as it is now in the story, but during the process, during all our communications, and also like reading the papers and the like other materials that Athena sent to me, I actually like had have like developed a clearer idea about Cyber-Cuscuta, and also like drew many inspirations of how microbiota like works. Like, you know, there are different species of microbiomes, and they live in our in like gut, and also we kind of sometimes we are influenced by those microbiomes. They can like lead us to eat certain kinds of food and maybe avoid other kinds. And like because different like kinds of gut microbiomes, they have like food favors, let's say food favors for different kind of like things like sugar or fibers or like other things. They kind of sometimes compete for the same like kind of food, and sometimes they collaborate to like digest one kind of food. And also like they have complicated relationship with human beings. They are kind of not only parasitic, but also like in symbiosis with us, and also they are in symbiosis with each other. So actually, the story drew a lot of inspiration from how microbiomes work and how they live with us.
Yeah, well, that's actually a perfect bridge, because I was gonna bring that up next. You know, it's another really helpful overlapping, I think, lens for, as we've been talking about memes and digital communication. There's also this way that the story resonates with this whole picture that you've laid out of the geography and evolutionary kind of history of our microbiomes. Athena, could you talk a little more about that? Because I know that your research and thinking on this was a huge influence, as Regina said.
Yeah, sure. So, you know, there's been a lot of research in the last decade about the microbiome and how it affects us. And
could you actually define what that is really quickly, just in case there is anybody for whom that's a new term, or who they've heard it and not quite gotten a clear definition?
Yeah, so the microbiome are all of the microbes. So that includes bacteria, yeast, viruses. Oftentimes it also includes macroparasites. So, you know, if you have multiple celled organisms that are living in and on you, which all of us do. So microbiome is basically everything that is living in and on us that is not genetically us in terms of, you know, being identical to our germline, the cells of our body. And current estimates are that there are about 30 trillion or so microbes, and about 30 trillion cells of ours. So it's about half and half. So, you know, we really are half microbe, half human. You know, the whole idea of like half human, half machine. No, it's half human, half microbe.
Right.
But the question of, you know, how much does the microbiome influence us? There's still a lot of controversy and questions about how big of an influence the microbiome has on us. In my mind, there's a lot of quite convincing work that shows that you can manipulate people's microbiomes with probiotics, for example, and have, you know, changes in symptoms like anxiety and stress. Like, so, for example, lactobacillus seems to experimentally actually lead to lower anxiety and stress. So eat your yogurt. But overall, I would say that there's still a lot of controversy. I think the reason, or one of the reasons that there's so much controversy, is because we like to believe that we are the sole writers of our fates and destinies as humans, and that we're in control, and any influence on our behavior is somehow coming from, you know, the little homunculus inside our brains that we consider us, as opposed to, you know, all of these diverse other influences, which might be coming from things that are not genetically us, that are inside us. as just a little bit of background about how microbes might be doing this. So we know that the gut actually has nerve endings in it that go directly from the gut into the brain. So there is a sort of neural superhighway, it's called the enteric nervous system, where electronic signals can go from the gut to the brain. Microbes can also produce hormones and neurotransmitters that are the same as some human hormones and neurotransmitters, and some that are mimics, basically. So they aren't identical, but they do activate the receptors in the same way as the human ones do. So the way I like to think of it is that they have access to a lot of buttons and levers. And, so really the question is, well, are they doing anything, and is what they're doing to benefit them? And, there's still controversy, I think, about to what extent they're manipulating us for their own benefit. Me and my colleagues have written about how we would expect it to be the case that they are, given basic evolutionary theory and the logic that derives from that. But yeah, not everybody agrees, so I have to give that caveat there.
I mean, it does get at that same kind of digital ecosystem image that I was talking about earlier. It feels to me like when we've talked about the story previously, like there is this sense that the story works as a metaphor and analogy, maybe even for the way that our own bodies work, that there's this ecosystem in there. There's this whole kind of play of forces at different scales that are adding up to a gestalt of like behavior or attitude or emotion, these really complicated processes that have more kind of chemical and sort of non-human inputs than we initially expected.
Yeah, I mean, you could think of our nervous systems, as having a lot of activity that's coming from our own somatic cells, the cells that we consider us, but then all these other influences that are coming from the microbes that are living inside us and on us. So yeah, that is a digital space. I mean, our nervous systems are digital systems. They work on like a fire or not of a neuron, and that's how information gets transferred within our bodies.
I'd like to hear what you both think too about and perhaps this was influenced pretty directly, Regina, by conversations you had with Athena about her work, but it seems like the story traces a shift that at least I think is somewhat evident in the way we're thinking about microbiota, that, we're getting away from that pasteurization model, a sort of antiseptic model of like, trying to clean our bodies out of microorganisms or protect our lived environments from microorganisms, to this more, holistic approach. Maybe, I don't know quite the right word for it, but, I've seen some studies covered in the popular press that like things like making sourdough bread or like even having pets like can make your microbiome or the biota around your body more diverse, and that can actually be a point of strength and not just a vector for infection. I don't know if either of you have thoughts about like the way that this, our thinking might be changing about the way our bodies interact with a larger ecosystem, but also like, how that gets the challenges around getting that mindset to shift or have some flexibility in it.
Yeah, of course. I think like we human beings as a species, we tend to be let's say suspicious and like afraid of like strange things or new things that come to us that we don't understand. So very easily we come to the idea, okay, we should just kill them all. And because we don't know them, and they seem to be dangerous to us, and they seem to live on us, or they like seem to like just be parasites. But if we like it might be new, like comparatively new to like come to know microbiomes or like digital beings in my stories. But think about like if we encounter certain ecological problems, we have been doing that to like just for example, kill all the wolves that are eating our sheep. And the turnout is that, okay, the rabbits, they like occupy the entire ecosystem and eat all the grass, and also like that cause the imbalance to our environment. So like the simple thinking kill them all actually has already been proved to be not always true. We always need to think like twice before doing something. And the other thing is that for those like microbiomes and for example insects and for example, Cyber-Cuscuta in our story, they are like so tiny and they are everywhere. So it's actually impossible to kill them all in the entire world. Like a famous quote from the famous Chinese science fiction novel, The Three-Body Problem, is that human beings like on the earth are like insects. They like the three-body aliens, when they come to us, they can kill us, but they can not kill us all. So like it's basically like not realistic to kill them all. They are everywhere and they are intertwined with our ecosystem so much. So that's something we need to come to realize. Yeah.
Yeah, I can add to that. So this phenomenon that Regina is talking about, where you can't always kill everything that's there, right? And then what is left after, if you've tried to wipe things out, those things that are left are the things that are most resistant to being wiped out. And then those entities grow because now there's open space and resources. So this is called competitive release in ecology. And these ecological dynamics then lead to evolutionary dynamics. So you have a situation where now that effort that you've done to kill everything is the evolutionary pressure, it's the selective pressure that leads to the most resistant, hardest to kill entities to then have that opportunity to expand and take over the population, take over the space that's left. And this is an issue both with the microbiome and also with cancer. And it's one of the reasons that cancer is so hard to kill is because there's so many cells and they're so diverse that very often, even when you begin therapy, there are already cells there that are resistant to the therapy that you're going to use. And so when you use the therapy, you're basically selecting for the cells that are resistant to it. And you're essentially cultivating, ironically, you're cultivating a tumor that is untreatable. So I think that these kinds of questions of, how do we see the value of the existing diversity that's there, right? And try to not wipe it out with a sort of kill everything that isn't us kind of approach. Yeah. And how do we also, if there is something that could be damaging to us, how do we take an approach of keeping it under control rather than trying to eradicate it? This is an issue with cancer and some new approaches to cancer that are really exciting, where the goal is really control as opposed to eradication. There's an approach called adaptive therapy that I've written some about that's been pioneered at Moffitt Cancer Center. It's really exciting. But this has been used in pest management for decades. Yeah. This idea that, you don't try to kill everything. Instead, you use the doses that are needed to keep it under control. And sometimes you even, like in pest management, oftentimes what they'll do is they'll actually keep an area of the field that they don't spray at all, so that the pests that are sensitive to the pesticide that they're using can thrive there. And that way, that population then can take over again, and then they have the possibility of keeping it under control. And so these are kind of counterintuitive ideas, right? Like, well, why would you want to make it possible for, any of these things, any of these pests to stick around? Well, it turns out that some pests are a lot worse than others. And there's a lot of benefits often to having a more diverse population, even if it's just pests. Because if you go for a kill them all approach, then you end up left only with the things that you cannot keep under control.
Yeah, it strikes me that like this kind of shift in thinking is across a lot of sectors like considered necessary, and I think it feels to me like it's a move away from just like a sort of approach that says like we just need to keep everything as clean as possible, or like anything that's icky is just like, well, that's evolutionarily like our body's telling us like stay away from that thing, or that thing needs to be eradicated, to some sort of a more of a cohabitation, or perhaps even, as the story suggests, a symbiotic approach. We see so many of us use pest control that's chemical, and it's that and agricultural practices contribute to like cutting down, as it turns out, hugely on the number of pollinators on Earth. All these insects that we see as pests are like necessary to keep all of the plants that we depend on for oxygen alive, and it's turning into this huge global crisis. It also weirdly reminds me of research in harm reduction in drug use, where like often things like needle exchanges or alternative therapies can be helpful, as opposed to an approach that just tries to like really sort of lock up and be very punitive with people who use illegal drugs, because then that ends up just driving the use underground and increasing mortality. Often if you can kind of like look the problem in the face and sort of see those folks as human beings who are coping with something, like you can end up helping them a lot more and lowering mortality from something that can be really dangerous. I don't know, I'm seeing all these strange, cross-sectoral connections, but it seems to me it's like things that we think of as abject, whether it's the Cyber-Cuscuta, these beings in the story who seem like parasites, or the pests you're talking about, or probably maybe the scariest thing, Athena, the cancers that you were talking about and that you researched. It's like that idea of like an invader or something icky or something that's in our space or in our bodies that we need to like learn to think differently about. And that seems like a really challenging narratological problem of coming up with a new story for what those beings are, or what those challenges are.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I'll just add, because I'm actually really into fermentation, and this just, it came out of me at first just liking the taste of kombucha that I would buy at the store. And then at some point I was like, oh, I wonder if I could make it. So then I started brewing it, and then I started watching it. And then I started doing research on it. So I actually have a whole research program about kombucha. And it turns out that, these fermented foods like kombucha, they are made of these diverse communities that together are processing the, like the sugar and the other elements that are, in these foods, in order to create this, these fermented foods that we really enjoy. And actually, I don't know if you can see, I've got that's my SCOBY over there right next to my cleaning products. So I am literally right now smelling my kombucha, which is off to the corner over here. And I kind of consider it like a part of my family. I've got like my kombucha over here. I've got my sourdough in the fridge. I've got my yogurt. I make yogurt. And if you'll excuse my little, story here for a minute. I ended up having to go on antibiotics like a week and a half ago. And I hate going on antibiotics. I only do it if it's absolutely necessary. I think it's like the first time in a long time I've had to, but after and during when I was on them, I was like, okay, the kombucha, all right, the yogurt, okay, like just trying to, get as much, as many diverse microbes from my culture as possible. So so I almost was like thinking in that process after taking the antibiotics that like I'm so glad like I have these reservoirs of like diverse microbes that I can use to help repopulate my gut. So yeah, so for me it's an important part of my life, not just as a scholar who's studying kombucha, but just the way that I like to eat and interact with my food and, grow these diverse microbial communities in the various rooms of my house. So
Well, and it is, I mean, that actually brings me to a point I wanted to bring up, which is a sort of keyword for the story that I just hope that you two could talk around a little bit, is symbiosis. That, you know, in fact, Athena, your affection for these foods and the fact that they're so tasty has like made it so you've helped them thrive in your house and given them new places to live and, you know, helped them grow and reproduce, and fed them. And, you know, in the meantime, like, you're getting something out of it. And you know, it sounds like probably the research suggests you're getting a variety of health benefits. I don't know, Regina, I feel like symbiosis was a really key thing in this story. And the idea of a sort of paradigm shift, I guess, that the Cyber-Cuscuta were trying to sort of get across to humans in the story. Was that something you were thinking about, shifting from this parasite model to this symbiotic model?
Yeah, of course. So we are like, from anthropocentric perspective, like, human beings are kind of like the distinguished, like the respected, like #1 species on the earth, that we tend to think other like beings serve us in certain ways, and we tend to treat them as, okay, if you are useful to us, then we tame you and we like use you. But if you are kind of harmful to us, we just kill you. Actually, I think we don't really like are the like only important species on the earth, and we shouldn't be like treating other species, other beings, like okay, just thinking from our own perspective. And if we change our mind, they are not actually like parasitic, but also like in symbiosis with us. And the Cyber-Cuscuta, they are actually, well, in the story, they are actually helping us in some sense to digest the extra entropy in our digital world, and kind of control like the total amount of entropy and keep a balance of our digital space. However, there is no similar things in our physical world, and that's why our like environment issues started to get like worse and worse, like climate change and other things like that. So there is a like I can't help thinking that if there is something similar to like Cyber-Cuscuta that can co-live with us, and they we provide to them, and they help us to maintain the balance, it would kind of be a good thing. So like I put the story ending as like, okay, so we are actually not enemies, not pesticides, but we are like your symbionts, and we should live together.
Yeah, I think it's also interesting to kind of think about this in relation to the different ways about thinking of our sources of food. And, you know, the sort of industrial farm complex approach is very much a sort of, you know, what can the food do for us kind of model, right? And how can we maximize the, you know, number of just the amount that, you know, we're getting from the amount of eggs that we're getting from chickens, the amount of meat that we're, you know, getting from cows, the yield from crops. So, you know, where the only outcome is really how much we are getting as humans. And I think, you know, there are a lot of people now that are interested not just in fermentation, but also in having, you know, gardens, even, you know, having small livestock, chickens, right? I mean, people have been having chickens even in urban spaces now, and kind of returning to a relationship with food that is not just about, you know, getting the highest yield in a sort of industrial format, but having more of a relationship with the source of your food, whether it's, you know, animals that you're taking care of, or microbes that you're cultivating or plants that you're, watering and caring for. But that sense of, greater closeness to the source of your food and kind of awareness almost of, well, what are the needs of these entities that I am depending on? It creates more of a interdependent kind of relationship rather than a exploitative one. And so I think that kind of connects with these ideas about symbiosis that Regina, kind of has as sort of the culmination of the story.
Yeah. So we've had a couple good questions from the audience that I'd like to pose to you too, if that's all right. And actually, one of them, which we'll start with. Oh, by the way, I should say, please continue to send in questions and comments. We have a few already that I'm excited to get to, but you can just use the Q&A button on the bottom of the screen. So the first one is from Robin. And Robin says, entropy is a difficult subject for many people to wrap their head around. Is this to emphasize the mysteriousness of the Cuscuta's operation, since entropy is their energy source? I guess it just raises the question, Regina, of entropy and what role it plays in this story, and why you thought about that. Was it to make the Cuscuta more mysterious and sort of more mind-bending to think about, or did you have another set of ideas around entropy as it plays out in the story as kind of a keyword?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Like partly it also it adds to the mysterious of the story, and also I think it kind of connects with the inner logic of how Cyber-Cuscuta works, because we know the difference between data and the information. Like kind of information is processed data, and they are organized. So when we think about the chaos or the chaotic data, they tend to express higher entropy than kind of organized information. So the Cyber-Cuscuta, they kind of take in entropy, like human beings, for example, take in nutrients, and then they kind of maintain the balance and keep the total entropy in the digital world in control, instead of just let it grow wildly and turn into a mess. I think it both adds to the mysterious and also connects with the inner logic of how it works.
When you first pitched us this story idea many weeks ago, you talked about it having kind of a Taoist element to it. Is there any, you used the word balance there, and I know that's something we talked about when we first discussed the story. Do you feel like that there is some sort of like Taoist vibe, Taoist DNA in the story? Did that kind of survive to the actual story after that original idea? And if so, how?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think actually Taoism has an implied or sometimes unconscious influence to many Chinese people today, although it's an ancient philosophical thinking. For example, in this story, balance is a key thing, and also there is kind of a comparison or transformation of metaphors between human beings and Cyber-Cuscuta. So in Taoism, we have this model of yin and yang, which you must have seen as when it's shown in the Tai Chi diagram. And for yin and yang, they are not two opposite forces, but they are always in transformation and in kind of interdependence. So in the story, I think Cyber-Cuscuta and human beings, they are the same. They are not two separate and opposite forces, but they are kind of transformative and interdependent. Like the Cyber-Cuscuta says that human beings actually they are Cuscutas towards the Earth, because we are kind of, if we think from the Earth, the planet's perspective, we are kind of parasites on the Earth, right? So we tend to think like, if we think from human beings perspective, then Cyber-Cuscuta, they are parasites of our digital space. But actually all those different sides, they can transform into the other. So yin is not always yin, and yang is not always yang. And also, the key word of Taoism is actually like balance. So we respect the balance a lot. It's not always we tend to, we want one side to win and the other side to lose. We don't want to always like totally like have complete control, but we like the ideal status of Dao is balance. So with those different forces, and we tend to reach a coexistence with a balance.
You know, that actually, your kind of discussion there of a sort of multi-species perspective, sort of like shaking the frame a little bit on that human-centric perspective, is a really nice lead into the next question from the audience. So if you don't mind, I'll do that. It's a humdinger of a question. It's from Stephen. And by the way, Robin, thank you so much for your question about entropy. That was a great topic that was not on my list. So Stephen says that this whole conversation has seemed to call into question a highly cherished value in American and Western culture, more generally, the importance of independence and individuality. So understanding the microbiome, Stephen writes, is called into question where a person ends and their bacterial colonies begin. And on the macro scale, Athena described our minds as being like the neurons of the internet. So do the two of you think that Western belief systems can make it challenging for people to appreciate and act on these framings? Do they, you know, is there a danger of being locked into kind of an individualistic perspective that's counterproductive, I guess?
I can give a perspective actually that's kind of based in some of the fieldwork that we've done in the American West with ranchers. So you know, these are people who are essentially, you know, living the like cowboy ranching life. They have ranches where they have cattle. They're out there on their horses with their dogs. You know, so I mean, they're really like literally living this embodiment kind of what many of us think as kind of the American values of, you know, independence and individuality. What's really fascinating about them though is that coexisting with this notion that you should be self-reliant and independent and, you know, your own person, you should be able to take care of yourself and you should take care of yourself. They also have this belief in the importance of mutual aid when unexpected things happen. For example, if someone gets injured or ill or there's a death, they jump in to help each other without expecting to get paid back at all. And this is, you know, as much a part of the cultural fabric for them as the ideas of sort of independence and self-reliance. And so I think that there are kind of multiple dimensions to these, you know, American values kind of about independence, and that interdependence is, you know, is in there very, very deeply, at least when it comes to dealing with situations where there are unexpected needs that arise. So I think that's kind of just an important piece of background to put in there. But I do think that in general, in a sort of day-to-day life situation, or when there aren't big challenges that can be threatening people's, you know, lives and well-being, that there is definitely a sort of mentality of, you know, individuality, independence, that the things you accomplish are because of you, not because of the benefits that you've gotten with the, you know, place that you've been in society, or the family that you came from, or all the support that other people have given to you, right? It's you, it's your, you know, you're the reason that you succeeded. So I think that both of these kind of cultural framings are present, and you know, and I don't think that the Western belief system has to be a barrier to this, because there are all these different dimensions of it. It might just be a matter of, you know, kind of cultivating and growing those aspects of the belief system that do resonate more with the reality. I mean, the fact is, you know, a lot of us, we live our day-to-day lives, you know, feeling like we're independent, right? Because, you know, you can, you know, if you can't go to that grocery store, you can go to this one. Or, you know, if you can't get the help you need from, you know, one place, you can buy it from another place. And that substitutability, I think, often makes us feel like we're independent, when in reality, even all of our market interactions are, you know, the reason that all of those are possible is because of the underlying interdependence that is there. You know, every time we have a market transaction, that is part of a huge chain of interdependence that exists. So to me, it's a matter of really surfacing that reality, and connecting it with, you know, how we do rely on each other to meet our needs, even if we're not aware of it. And sometimes, you know, it's a matter of life and death, and sometimes it's just a matter of, you know, whether you have groceries in your fridge. But all of those interactions, there is a lot of interdependence that is just built into the structure of how all of our lives work.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like I totally agree with what Athena talks. There's certainly like diversity in this like cultural stereotype in independence and individualism in like Western or American way of thinking. There is a story that I want to refer to by Kanyu called Monono Arare, and it's about the protagonist is like Japanese boy grew up in American culture. So the story actually talks about like heroes. So you can see that like the hero maybe in many Hollywood movies are kind of one or several certain superheroes, but actually in his story, the heroes are everyone who kind of do their tiny bit of a job and fulfill their tiny bit of responsibility in this larger mission. And when talking about this story, Ken said that like the actually like the thinking, the philosophy the story is based on was based on like I can't remember, but from an American philosopher's thinking, instead of what people usually think, okay, the Eastern like collectivism versus the West individualism. So the story was like draws inspirations and the philosophy from this American philosopher instead of like Eastern philosopher.
I should say people should definitely go read that story. Monono Arare is incredible. Thank you so much for both bringing up such great examples. And thank you, Stephen, for that question. So before we say goodbye, I did have a parting shot question that I wanted to ask the two of you before we sort of sign off and tell people where to find you and your work. And that's a question we've been asking in most of these events, which is, what is this story, a Cyber-Cuscuta Manifesto, have to tell us about community? You know, I think we've been talking around these ideas the entire time we've been talking through all these different framings, but I don't know if each of you has a couple thoughts on sort of how it's made you think differently about those issues, or what definitions or ideas about community you think the story sensitizes us to or forwards.
Yeah, of course. So when we think about community, in many occasions, our first impression is those who are similar to us and can kind of like form a community with us, regarding like race or cultural or gender or things like that. And now we have come to the stage to understand that, okay, whatever like the race, culture, or gender is, we are an entire community as human beings. And this story actually wants to like show that okay, community is, well, we can think beyond that, not only like the same species with us, but everything we live with, no matter it's like animals or plants or microbiomes, they can be community with us. And also like the Cyber-Cuscuta, like the fictional being, they are community with us. So while the story tends to enlarge our thinking or imagination about what community can be.
Yeah, I'll just add on to that, that I think that one of the really interesting themes in this story is about the sort of diversity of what community can be, right? And not only does it not have to be the same species, but it also doesn't even have to have the same kind of physical instantiation as life as we know it. And to me, that's kind of the most interesting and provocative aspect of Regina's story, is this challenge to start thinking about the electronic world, the ideas that are circulating and, you know, expanding, and some are dying off and some are going wild, to start to think about that as part of the community that we're a part of, that we're cultivating, and that we're in relationship with. And maybe we can't really so much separate who we are from this world that you know, we partially have, you know, created intentionally, and partially have, you know, really curated through our own preferences unwittingly, and sometimes in a way that we like, sometimes in a way that we don't. But regardless, it you know, there is something very lifelike about this world that we have created, where information jumps from brain to brain and platform to platform, sometimes, you know, expanding virally, right, and other times dying off. So so I think that it's almost a call for all of us to think differently about our own relationship with the electronic media that we consume and that we share, and to think about, you know, well, if we do consider this as part of our community, then what do we want to cultivate? What do we want to be putting out into that space? What do we want to be consuming and sharing and participating in, so that that part of us that we're interdependent with as a global community can thrive, and we can thrive along with it.
Well, thank you both so much, Regina and Athena, for being here. I should note that where Regina is, it's 4 in the morning, or it's almost 5 in the morning now. And so yeah, she woke up extremely early, obscenely early, to be with us today. So we really appreciate that so much. I do want to give you each a chance just to tell folks where the best place is to find more about you and more about your work online. Regina, would you like to go first?
Yeah, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here, and thank you for the invitation. So for me, like I'm on Facebook, like just with the name Regina Wang, and I have a Twitter account, but I don't really use it. But I do operate a Shimmer program on both Twitter and Facebook that kind of introduce Chinese science fiction in general. So not only about my own work, but if you are interested in like following like my own works, you can like just send me friend request on Facebook.
Great. Athena?
Yeah, and I'm pretty active on Twitter. I'm Athena Aktipis, pretty easy to find me there. Also my website, athenaactipis.org, has a lot of information about my work if you want to learn more. And really excited also to be putting together the Zombie Apocalypse Medicine meeting in October. And if you want to find out more information about that, that's on zombiemed.org and also channelz.org. So we're going to actually be holding the conference as a television show, or as a television channel with various shows on it, with television taking place in the zombie apocalypse. So that's our concept. It's blending fiction and fact, and kind of creating a radically interdisciplinary space to bring all this together. So if you're interested in that, feel free to drop me a line and we can get you on our mailing list for that.
Fantastic. So our next Us in Flux story will be by Usman Malik, and we're going to publish it on Thursday, July 9th. And then we'll have another one of these conversations in 2 weeks. So on Monday, July 13th at the same time, which is 4 p.m. Eastern US and 1 p.m. Pacific, and 4 a.m. in Shanghai. And you can find all of our Us in Flux stories and register for our events at csi.asu.edu/usinflux. And you can also watch videos of previous events. Thank you so much to everybody who joined us, for being here with us, for asking great questions, and for supporting our work. And once again, Regina and Athena, thank you so much for your time and your smarts. And this was a lot of fun.
Thank you. I love hearing brains, so, you know, my pleasure.
All right. Have a lovely afternoon, evening, morning, wherever you are. And once again, thanks so much. Goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.